Hey folks, Barry Grez Guitars here. I want to talk to you today about semi-hollow guitars versus chambered versus weight relieved. I only make one of those, but I want to make sure that you understand the difference because I get a lot of questions confusing chambered and what I'm making. So if we start with weight relief, I think everyone's kind of clear on that. You want your 9-pound guitar to weigh 8, that would be nice. And that's usually done just by putting some holes in the body. Traditionally, we're talking about maybe a Les Paul style guitar with a maple cap. The cap then hides all the holes you put in. And each hole takes a little bit of weight out. And the trick here is to not make the hole too big so that it doesn't want to resonate, and to not let the top that's covering the hole be too thin. Again, it'll want to resonate. The goal here is to make something that sounds the same as the unweight relieved instrument. So we need a thick top and a small hole so it can't resonate. If you have too many holes of the same size, each one resonates just a little bit at a particular frequency. It kind of makes a little note, if you will. So if each one of those holes is a different diameter, you're spreading out the effect. Or you could make them holes or slots or teardrop shape so that you're spreading out the resonances over a wide range of frequencies and it becomes less noticeable. Where it starts to become noticeable is if you have a larger chamber you've cut out and you put a top on that's a little too thin, and you end up with a big chamber with a very, very thin top, and if you tap on it, you'll get a note. You've basically made a little tiny drum, and that, in my view, tends to sound bad. Just like on an acoustic guitar, we have a large airspace, we have a very thin top, but on the back side of the top is bracing. And one of the principles you look at in an acoustic guitar is to not have too large of an area unbraced. You don't want any one area unbraced that could move independently and create a single note. You want it broken up so that you're spreading out the resonance as much as possible. So if we then shift from weight relieved to chambered, we're really just making those holes bigger. But we start to get into an area where they're big enough that they might start to affect the sound of the instrument. They might cause things to resonate differently. If you look at a thin line Telecaster, for example, that has a fairly large area routed out, but the top is still relatively thick. It's not acoustic guitar thin. So that keeps it from resonating too much. It does resonate, and there's no question you can hear the difference between a chambered Tele and a standard, but it's a slight change. It's by no means turned it into an acoustic instrument. When we go to a full semi-hollow body, traditionally it's not a continuation of the design from solid body to weight relieved to chambered, then semi-hollow body. It's not coming from that direction, it's actually coming from the other direction, from an archtop guitar to a semi-hollow body, where you're taking an archtop construction with thin plates and adding a rib down the middle that ties the top and the back together. But you're doing this to an acoustic instrument. You're coming at it from this side. Now it is possible to get there from chambering, which is what I do with the Mendicino. So if you take a chambered design, you can take it to an extreme where it starts to behave like a semi-hollow body by having very little back thickness left. Again, just like we were talking about these unwanted resonance that can happen if your top is too thin, it can happen if your back is too thin. So there is a balance. We're making the back thinner so that it becomes a little bit lively and is adding something to the sound, but not so thin that it just goes nuts and honks at a particular frequency. And then the same thing with the top, thinning it the appropriate amount for the size of the instrument so that it starts to have more of an acoustic voice, but isn't uncontrollably resonating at any one frequency. Actually, the Mendicino has some bracing under the top, just like an acoustic guitar would, in order to allow us to thin the top even further, which enhances the acoustic voice, but with the addition of the bracing, spreads out the resonances, so it isn't just resonating at one or two frequencies. One of the things people are concerned about with all of this is feedback as you go from solid to weight relieved through to semi-hollow body. A lot of this fear of feedback is old information from back when PA systems weren't so strong and you had to have a giant guitar amp on stage and you had to crank it up so that the audience could actually hear you. And in that case, there's so much acoustic energy on stage that you would want to have a solid body guitar or a chambered guitar, but maybe not a hollow body or a semi-hollow body, right? And that's how we got there. That's how we went from the acoustic arch top to the semi-hollow body to solid bodies eventually. A lot of that was for feedback rejection on larger stages. It was one of the driving factors in designing these sort of guitars. But now things have obviously gone the other way, and so many people are playing with smaller amplifiers and stage volumes are lower, so the need to have a immensely feedback resistant instrument isn't quite there. So you can play a semi-hollow body at levels that you couldn't before because the giant PA is putting the sound out, not the guitar amp that's 8 feet from you. Now gain is slightly different than just volume, and with a high gain system you can get yourself into feedback even if you're not playing at crazy high volume. But still I would say that it's something that can be played with, and you might find that a chambered guitar works and a semi-hollow doesn't for your particular application. Things aren't quite as bad as they say out there in the world sometimes, and depending on your style, is feedback really that big of a deal? Uncontrolled feedback is a problem. An instrument that wants to go into feedback at the volumes you play at, but in a controllable way, it may be an excellent instrument for you. So weight relief is effective. Most would probably agree if done well, it doesn't negatively impact the sound. Chambering can impact the sound, and that could be purposeful or inadvertent, oftentimes in a good way though. And then going all the way to semi-hollow, which is what I'm doing most of the time, is more viable than a lot of people think these days.